think we're going. So Dan, welcome. Dan Campbell has his MS in oceanography from Old Dominion University in 1977. He got his PhD in systems ecology at the University of Florida under HT Odum in 1984. After that, he spent 2 years as a postdoc at the University of Maine, and then 4 years in the Maine Department of Marine Resources, and about 4 years as a research scientist at the University of Rhode Island, and then almost, and I'm not quite sure, almost 30 years with the US EPA. Was it 29 or was it 30?
If you count all my service, I came in with 25 years, but
25, okay.
I spent a lot of time in academia.
All right. You hold an adjunct professor in School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island, an adjunct research scientist in ocean sciences at Boothbay Harbor in Maine, and an adjunct professor at the University of Siena in Siena, Italy. It's a great place. Dan has published over 70 papers, books, and chapters on estuarine systems and Emergy. And Dan was the founder in 2002 of the ISAER, the International Society for the Advancement of Emergy Research, also known as the Emergy Society, which under his leadership has flourished into an international society with nearly 320 members. So Dan, welcome to the, I can't remember now, how many have we done?
We're getting close to 10, if not maybe already 10, maybe.
Around the 10th interview of former HT Odum students, colleagues, and friends, and the podcast that we've titled the Contributions of HT Odum and Systems Ecology. So welcome, Dan. How you doing?
I should say that I'm not the only person responsible for the Emergy Society. There are Betty and Dave Tilley and several other people. There were a list of people that were initial founders of it. But I've certainly not been responsible for its success because the members have done that. But we're still going and we still have people that are involved in it. And hopefully we're going to have another Emergy Research Conference combined with University of Florida facilities in January 2025.
That's true.
But things seem to be going well. And the main problem with that now is to find out where it goes next. Somebody else has got to take it up. I'm too old to do these things anymore. Anyhow.
You're never too old then. Well, we usually start these things with a question that how in the world did you ever wind up in Gainesville, Florida? When did you first hear about HT Odum, and what caused you to think that that was a good place to go?
I heard about HT Odum from the source himself, but I didn't know anything about HT Odum, if you want to know the truth. I was an oceanographer, and I had an idea about the integrals of science by studying the 4 branches of oceanography. And I also had a feeling that energy was an important aspect of things. But I didn't know about HT per se until I went to an American Society of Limnology and Oceanography meeting in Savannah, Georgia. And there, the first talk I heard the night before was by Dr. Eugene Odum, HT's brother, who I had heard of because, he just wrote the, classic ecology text. But I didn't realize the energy chapter in that was written by HT. But anyhow, I went to Eugene's talk, and he was a very smooth talker. He's my kind of person in terms of his urbane ability to give a good talk. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. And the next day, I happened to go to this society meeting. It was on lake chemistry. And I came in a little bit late, sat in the back of the room, and I started listening to this guy who was a good chemist. And about 5 minutes into the meeting, here comes this 6'5", maybe some man, 300-pound guy plus. He comes in and he sits down. There's one chair by me because I was in the back. He sit down by me. And so he was sitting by me, and I looked at him. 5 minutes later, he was snoring away. I said, "Who is this?" I tried to take a look at him, and then I was trying to listen to the talk too. And then finally, I saw his name tag, and it said HT Odum. So I said, "Oh, I know that name. This guy, he's the brother of Eugene Odum, who I just heard a talk by." Because I really hadn't read any of his material, but after the talk, I introduced myself to him. And he said, "Hi, I'm Dan Campbell, and I'm an oceanographer." And he started talking to me. So immediately he focuses in on you. That's the way he always was. He didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to know about you and what you were doing. So he asked me, and I told him I'd done this integrated study of suspended matter in water. And I looked at all these different aspects of things. So he let me talk a little bit, and then he got up and he, I forget exactly what he said, but it had something to do with systems. And when we got finished with our conversation, somehow it had come up. I was down there and looking for the next step to do. So he said, "I have a job for you in Florida." So he wanted to hook me into his diverse network of people that were doing Crystal River. And I said, at first he asked me, "Well, what are you interested in? Are you interested in, water? Are you interested in the universe, the world, the whole thing?" I said, "Well, I'm interested in the whole thing." He said, "I've got a job for you at that point." And so, he was always mobbed by people wherever he went. Everybody wanted a piece of his attention. And, I saw that, and I appreciated his generosity, but he didn't forget that. Every time he saw me, he said, "You're coming to Florida and you're going to be there so-and-so." This was in June. And in July, I think I put in an application. The end of July, I was accepted. I'd been interviewed. I was on my way to Florida by the end of the summer. So that September, I came down to University of Florida and started my career with HT. So I didn't know too much about him. I learned a little bit in the meantime. And the first year, I think, my head must have hurt 100% of the time, every evening, trying to get my mind around what he was trying to teach people. And that's how I met him. And he was, even though he had everybody chasing him and trying to run him down, he didn't forget me the whole time. He kept his communication going, and
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So you wound up in Florida based on the fact that you sat next to him at a conference.
Yeah, I sat next to him in a conference, and we had a good conversation. I don't remember exactly what I said or why he got interested in me, other than that I was telling him about my work with suspended particles in water. But and I had the best guy in the world write me on that. This guy Bance, B-A-N-S-E. So what I was doing wasn't relevant, but he essentially put the whole thing together, and systems ecology was the place for me. So, and him. I mean, once I began reading about him, then I knew I'd happened upon the perfect place to be.
Mhm.
And he carried through on it. He didn't forget about me, and because you might know I'm not the person that's going to stand in the front of the room, but anyhow, he kept me going.
So what was some of the first, so you get to Florida and that fall, so you must take some classes, you reading Environment Power Society, or systems ecology is probably not quite published yet, right? I don't know if he's
No,
using that for his.
that was still under development, so he was still teaching the preliminary books on that. I began reading everything I could get my hands on, and doing it 24/7 pretty much. But he taught excellent courses. I took his general systems course. I took I don't know whether Emergy, I guess, hadn't really developed as a name at that point. So that was in the process of science man having a brainstorm on it, coming up with Emergy.
Was he teaching a course on Emergy or ecological economics at that point? Probably not in this. This is 77, right? You said, or
I came down there. Yeah, I guess it was 70. I'd have to go back and review. I think it was 76. Maybe it was 77. But 77 is when I got my degree, but I got my degree when I was at the University of Florida.
Mm.
I finished that degree first year I was at UF.
Okay.
But, the courses were under development, but his thinking on them, of course, was the same, but, coalescing on the general path that we all ended up taking. Because when he was around, you were looking for him to approve, whatever idea you brought forward, whether he
Yeah.
liked it or not. And that made a difference, but I didn't ever find that it was an unbreakable barrier that he had there. I did some things and gave some talks that would not have been, it wouldn't have been his first choice of having me to do things, but he gave me enough slack to do it. So that was good for me and good for him, because it makes you more productive if you're, can work on the ideas you're interested in. So other people shouldn't get into refereeing those. And I probably have done my share of that too, which is not good, but I appreciate my errors in the past. Anyhow.
It's funny.
I'm sorry. Do you have any memories of the courses, not especially ecological and general systems, sitting in there and listening to him?
Well, he was very good with his visual effects and his examples. And he spent a lot of time collecting pictures and things that he could, bring together to, illustrate a problem. So I since I was, started off studying art, the fact that he could use art in an effective way in teaching was something that was interesting to me. And I thought he was very effective. You always learn from taking his tests. They weren't tests that you just tested your knowledge. They really tested your understanding, and they brought in aspects of the problem that you wouldn't have probably thought about yourself ahead of time. But
Yeah.
so
Can you remember the tests that you had to walk up and down the hall? Can you describe that?
he had them set up like a museum. You went to each one and he asked you what problem, and then you had to watch him try to take his eye out with a pencil the whole time. He was always taking a pencil and sticking it on his eye. That used to drive me crazy.
Well, his tests were famous. If he would hang a picture there with a series of questions about it underneath, right? And
Wow.
all the students would be out there in the hall because there would be all these pictures along the walls, and it was fascinating to take a test that way. I mean,
Yeah, no, they were good tests though. He gave you questions that were stimulating and that you learned from taking.
yeah, for sure.
So, I don't know. I appreciated. He was a good teacher. He was a good professor. Yeah. And by the time he finished his work, he'd solved some problems that had been in my mind since I was an undergraduate in chemistry. I had this one professor in chemistry named Howard Ritchie at VMI. He was a very good organic chemist, but he was also used to talk to us about different things. And one of his things was the second law of thermodynamics. So, once the second law of thermodynamics had sunk into you, he didn't understand how you could, be a party to all these strange ideas. But anyhow, Odum solved that problem for me in one of the last papers that he did, which was his study with the I don't remember names anymore, but she was a geophysicist. I don't know where he got her.
Martha Gilliland?
No, not Martha Gilliland. She was another good one. I didn't cross paths with her. I wasn't in her. She was gone by the time I came to University of Florida. But I guess a bunch of you guys knew her pretty well, I think.
Oh, Carolyn Thonio Bodges? Did the phosphorus? No.
No, I'm talking about Martha Gilliland. She did the study of the mineral cycles. And I guess I just read somebody's paper. I guess it's Pat's book. He quotes her, but I knew about her, but I didn't ever actually meet her. I've never met her, I don't think. Anyway, I'm talking about that she was a geophysicist that he got together with when he did the paper on the universe. And one of the consequences of that paper, which to me was significant, I don't know whether anybody else got. You actually ended up publishing the paper, Mark, in the one of
The Emergy proceedings.
yeah,
No, it was in ecological modeling.
it was ecological modeling that combined.
I have something to say about that when you're finished. Go ahead.
Well, and anyhow, do you know what was the most significant thing you learned about that paper? You published it.
Well, that the universe is a steady state system.
Yeah, and basically there's a limit to the loss of the second law of thermodynamics. In other words, all laws have their boundaries, but you pointed out there that there are boundaries to the validity of the second law of thermodynamics. So that's a whole discussion there, and the people that are making careers about talking about whether or not the second law of thermodynamics is valid. But anyhow, from that paper, I got that there are limits to all laws, including the second law of thermodynamics. Anyhow, so he was always teaching you something, regardless of what it was.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about that paper. That was written for the first Emergy conference by HT, and he passed away shortly after the conference. And there were two papers that were in the works at that time. There was one with Sven Jorgensen on Emergy and Exergy, that he and HT started, and then I came in and made a major contribution to. And then there was this other paper. There's one on the universe, and Sven sent me an email one day and said, do you want to be first author on one of these papers? And I said, yeah. And it was the Exergy paper. And I think he put himself as first author. I don't remember now on the Emergy paper, and put me as first author on the HT Odum universe paper. So I feel terrible that it was not me. I mean, and it should not have been me. HT was I did a little bit of editing on the thing to put it into the final form, but it was HT's paper. But it's out there with my name on it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, HT always wanted his papers reviewed by somebody knowledgeable in the field, right? So
Right.
he asked me to take it over to the astronomy department and find somebody to review it before it went into the proceedings of the Emergy conference. And I bugged a couple of different people, and I finally got this guy. He said, oh, okay. He didn't want to review it, I could tell. He said, okay, I'll review it. And so I gave it to him, and then I had to bug him to get the review back. And when we got it back, it was a scathing review. He just said, this guy he doesn't know a damn thing about astronomy or the universe. He's got these wild ideas about steady state and blah, 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 and a hierarchy of things, and just
Typical reviewer.
I never told HT.
Well, he was dead at that time, wasn't he?
No, this was before.
This was before.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I never told him about it. I just buried that review and said to hell with it.
Well, yeah, I was glad it was published, and it didn't bother me that,
Well, I never should have had my name as first author, but
yeah, but it's in the proceedings as well, and that HT was alive at that point and did publish.
And it's not on my CV as one of my published papers.
It's good that you were there to have it published, and I think, like I say, it's a seminal paper in terms of understanding the universe. So the guys that think it's not can wait about 10 years or 20 years, or how long it takes, and they'll figure it is.
I need to go back and read that one, but I think the thing that I think about is like how he set up that you do have the steady state, but there's also the pulsing, and then the balance between gravity and information and the whole material cycle, and then the dark energy and the dark matter. To me, it seemed like it probably proposed as many questions as it answered in the end. How the system could actually operate, how could you simulate
and that
it?
everything was recycled. Remember, everything was recycled through black holes.
Yeah.
Well, that's always where we are in trying to figure out how things work. But HT always had some original way of looking at it, and it always made you think, if nothing else, about the way things operate.
he liked to explain the redshift, that everybody says that the redshift is what gives us the theory that the universe is expanding. And he said, now think about light, which you cannot change the speed of. And if it's flying through the universe and it's being pulled this way and it's being pulled that way by gravitation of these massive things, stars and even galaxies and everything else, and it can't lose any energy or any of its speed, what's going to happen is you're going to lose the lowest quality. You're going to shift the lowest quality energy, the red,
You
a
get
little,
the red shift. Yeah.
and it's just because of gravitational pull on the speed, the light that's photon flying through space. And that's the thing that pow, blew my mind. And I said, of course, it makes perfect sense.
I remember Guy McGrain, his PhD student, the electrical engineering student from the 90s, he studied that quite a bit, I think, when his dissertation. And I guess the physicists, the astronomers called it the tired old light idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they've kind of moved well beyond that as a
Yeah,
thought.
they're still trying.
I think my question is like, what did he say about? I need to go back and read general systems because I'm pretty sure he said something about quantum mechanics. I'm not sure what he said, but that's what the general principles are there, because it seems like a lot of things fall apart right at the quantum scale. And is it really just change in the hierarchy, and how does it relate to that universe paper? Because I'm not sure how much of that. Maybe you guys remember how much he addressed of that there. I don't think he did.
I'm not sure he ever adequately addressed the quantum theory stuff. I have to go back and look at it again. It's not, I mean, what would we get him to work on if we still had him around? That's a good question.
That's usually our final question for the interview.
Well, what would be worth his time?
Yeah, so many. That'd be a good one. Well, you got a lot of. Well, we only made it to your first semester, so you got a lot of time to tell us about what happened when you got there. So you worked on the Crystal River project, it sounds like, and that's one that. So we talked to Walt Boynton, and I think he was involved in that pretty heavily. And then he was telling us some of the field work they did on that. So what was that project like? Is that what you ended up working on? Or did he have you do something else once you got there?
No, that's the way I made money. He had me working for John Caldwell. Remember John Caldwell? He ran the project for him for a while. Great big guy. But I didn't do anything. I guess who was the fellow that did the temperature studies there? I don't remember names as well as I used to, but he was a common guy. I mean, you did temperature in Crystal River. Anything?
Murphy? Somebody start with an M? McGee?
This guy was. I'll think of his name eventually, but anyhow, he did some good work there.
But you really picked up on the modeling. This seemed like that's the thing that maybe you started doing there. That was theoretical aspects of the modeling.
Well, Crystal River was just how I made money, and my research was with the St. John's Management Water District. So I did models of systems there where they were looking at the effects on Cedar River was one of them, and then there was a creek there, Julington Creek, right? So I did models of those for people at University of North Florida, and don't remember the guy's name now. There was a woman and a man. Anyhow.
So these were like landscape models, kind of Emergy based, energetic, or more like the dynamic water quality?
These were, they were models of the estuary. So you had land and water mixed together there. And that was what they were interested in. It was different properties to the ecosystems in terms of their ability to tolerate that kind of insult. And Cedar River was one that was very polluted, and Julington Creek was not polluted at all. And they were both accessible to people at the University of North Florida. And we studied them. I helped Bob Knight with his study of, Silver Springs. I go with him and look at alligators' eyeballs at night. So you helped other people there too, it wasn't just what you did, it was, you interacted with the people that were there. But that study in Gilligan Creek and Cedar River is part of the river system there. The river, what is it?
St. John's?
The St. John's River, thank you, in North Florida. It covers all of North Florida. That never got published finally. It was what it was when we got finished with it. A lot of things didn't make it all the way to publication, but I had on my mind that I would do that, but I still haven't done it. And I've got enough things on my mind that I need to do. I probably won't end up doing that one.
It's kind of hard to go back that far.
Both know at this point. You get too many things you'd like to do.
Yeah.
With my, not hooked into an academic institution anymore. I don't have the organizing power I used to have. In terms of getting
So with the St. John's River project, is this something that Odum was heavily involved in, or what was his like? What was the kind of questions that were?
He drew plenty of models of it. I mean, I've still got the models that he drew for me. He drew models on all throughout my career. I've got an HT model of just about everything that I studied while he was in his mode of operation, which was a long time. But
So you're talking about you have like hand drawn models, his sketches of systems diagrams.
And no, they were hand drawn.
Yeah.
Always were. He would hand draw it, or you would draw on top of what I'd drawn on, something like that. Usually he'd take his own and do it. But he got me my first job once I left the University of Florida. I went to Maine and the Department of Marine Resources there. And there was a guy that ran that operation named Spencer Apollonio. He was a fisheries scientist, and HT went up there and talked to him, and he was from Yale, I think. He was from some good school, but he never got a PhD. But anyway, he had an idea of what he wanted to do, and he wanted one of HT's people to model the Gulf of Maine. So he got me a job there, and I went up to Maine. That's where I left the University of Florida and went to Maine. And I'd studied the Gulf of Maine for a number of years, and published a couple of papers up there. In one of these, they used to publish this series of books on estuaries, and one of the papers is in there on Gulf of Maine as an estuary. I already was applying the big picture to the Gulf of Maine because it was an estuary originally, back in the day when before the glaciers changed to the next system. But so he got me that job, and then after that, I went to the EPA. The EPA decided they wanted someone that did Odum stuff, so Odum really got me that job too. Although that was an interview job, and they hired me as an adjunct, not an EPA employee, but as a person that would provide information for them. And it's a category of work they have. Usually it's people that are in the university system. And I was attached to University of Rhode Island for about 3 or 4 years when I first went down there. And then I applied for and got a federal job. And let's see, was that before? Yeah, I think that was before HT died too. So he probably had something to do with getting me that job. I don't know. Anyway, I got the job, and I became a assistant, EPA employee, not assistant, but I wasn't hired by the EPA. But later on, when Clinton came into power, they gave all these government laboratories a choice of whether or not they wanted to have, hire people to be federal employees or whether or not they wanted to have contractors. So they decided they wanted federal employees. So I applied for a federal job at that time and got it. So that was 1995. And so basically all those jobs that I had probably had some influence from HT and the fact that I got them.
Mm-hmm.
I really actually was deserve them. I thought so, but then again,
So I
yeah.
want to go back to your dissertation. Did you have Emergy in your dissertation? Did you use did an Emergy evaluation of anything of the St. John's or those watersheds?
I did have Emergy in my dissertation. It
Okay.
was keyed on the filter properties of ecosystems.
Uh-huh.
So I used an electrical analogy of filters in order to look at maximum power in ecosystems. I have to get my dissertation out and look at it, but at the time it seemed original to me. So, but it was a general model. I should look at it again.
Mhm.
Probably should be published, but I never did publish it.
Yeah. So you graduated, when was it?
In
84.
1984.
84.
Mhm.
That was I think that was before Science Man arrived, or had Science Man been?
No, I experienced Science Man
Say again?
for at least a couple of years. Yeah.
I think we owe the audience an explanation of Dr. Science Man.
Yeah.
And it's funny, this came up in my class today. I was lecturing, I was telling them the story about Science Man, but I want to hear your story because you guys knew him from an earlier period. So who was David Science Man?
Well, a lot of people just wrote him off as being a quacko, but HT never wrote people off. I don't care how wacky you thought they were. He saw their brilliance and he saw what they could do. Same with Science Man. Science Man was a descendant. He was a Mitchell. His last name wasn't Science Man. He was an Australian Mitchell, and Mitchells owned half of Australia because they were in the oil industry there. So, but Science Man, he came here, and I don't know what his sexual proclivities were, but he was always kind of, and he came to University of Florida with his tag-along assistant, who was a Lebanese woman named Bourgeois El Yassif, and she probably owned the other half of the oil industry, but anyhow, or some of her relatives did. But I guess she was a good scientist. She was, and Science Man, I don't know, HT, you probably know better HT's interactions with Science Man than I do, but he always, listened to him and he worked with him on papers about Marx. I think that was a significant paper they did, and that Science Man was a contributor in that. He used to stay at you remember better than me, Mark, but he would stay at the Center for Wetlands, and he, some way, he was a word person, I guess. I don't know what the best way to put it was, etymologist, but he studied the basis for words, and he came up with Emergy as being the one that encapsulated the seminal ideas that Odum was doing in a way that no one else had grasped before. And for better or worse, I guess it's stood the test of time. And yeah, I know Mark has different opinions on this, but anyhow, I always gave Science Man, I always remembered that Odum respected him, and I tried to do the same. And so when we finally got to go to Australia, which was, I don't know the exact year, I'd have to look it up, but it was not too many years ago, I made a point of meeting Science Man and meeting him in his, he had this retreat that he lived in. I don't know, it was Episcopal Church or something like that. I can't remember. He wasn't Episcopalian, but anyway, he had a place there, and I went and visited him, and he was very prolific in the studies that he did, including ones of religious topics later on in his career, especially the Spring of Sharon was a place in Israel that he had focused on as a center for understanding in a systemic way how Israeli society worked and how it could work with others. But anyhow, and he worked with me and Elliot on a paper on Israel, and because we used his initial studies of that to do that paper. I have to go back and pull it out. I don't remember. I do remember the details of it. It basically said Israel's one system. There's not enough land there to have two systems. The idea that you're going to have two states there is a pipe dream because there's not enough environment there. The water recharges in Israel, and the Richard, the places where the water is sequestered in Israel below the ground, place where it recharges in the occupied territories. So it's one system. You can't split it apart. They're always going to have one system there to manage the environment. So they'll never have two systems. So how do you get them to get along together? And that's a $64 question these days. Anyhow, sorry.
Well, I'll give my recollections a little bit about Science Man. The story goes that HT was giving a lecture in Australia, and this science man, David Science Man, was in the audience, and he came up afterwards, after HT's lecture, and he says, "You need to speak to the Prime Minister." And Odum said, "Yeah, right, okay." And so either that same evening or the following day, Science Man appears at HT's door at a hotel and says, "Okay, I'm going to get the Prime Minister on the phone." And he calls the Prime Minister, and because it's Science Man, Prime Minister answers. And he says, blah, blah, blah. "Here, talk to HT Odum." And he hands the phone to Odum. That came directly from HT. He told me that's his introduction.
I've never heard that before. That's brilliant.
And to David Science Man. So Science Man, as you said, his original name, I thought it was David Slade.
Slade, yeah.
Well, his name was Slade, but his power comes from the Mitchells. To the Mitchells. But
anyway, he thought that there should be a scientific party, a political party, a scientific party. And to push that idea in Australia, he changed his name to Science Man officially so that it became Science Man. He was a physicist. I think he had a PhD in physics.
Quantum mechanics, yeah, he did.
Yeah. And so he, after that initial visit Australia, he came to Florida. And it's a character. I mean, he was an Australian character. There's no question about it. But he was a very deep thinker, and nomenclature was very important. As a physicist, your nomenclature is incredibly important. And he just could not handle that we were calling things fossil fuel equivalent ratios and all kinds of things. And he said, "You've got to get things really tied down." And the first thing, of course, was to name this thing that Odum was doing. That was, it's like embodied energy, but not embodied energy. And he came up with the idea. Well, there was somebody who asked, Odum was publishing a paper, and they asked him to change the word to Emergy.
Emergy, yeah.
Emergy.
Yeah.
And so there's a paper out there that has Emergy as as the word, and then after that, Science Man said Emergy, and he liked to think of it as energy memory, the memory of energy, he called it. And then for a number of years, all the papers that were published had the M capitalized, because when they first did it, the editors were sending it back and saying, "You guys can't even spell energy. How do you expect us to take this serious?"
Exactly. I'll still tell you that.
Yeah. And so we capitalized the Emergy for a while. But Science Man came up with the idea, the word, Emergy, and then the ratio of energy to energy, Odum called transformity. And then there's other things, but so we can thank Science Man for adding some rigor at a very important time. And it was an incredibly creative time at that point, when all of the newest Emergy stuff, the newest concepts and so forth, were being delivered on a weekly basis from Odum and System Seminar and so forth. And Science Man, dressed as he was with his Aussie hat and running shorts and shirtless T-shirts, and his hotel keys around his neck on a shoestring. I think we have to get that. I'll have to get that picture add it to, I'm going to add that picture to this talk so everybody can see David Science Man. I have a picture of him in his candy striped shorts and his Aussie hat. I'll add that to the course. Anyway,
He gave a lot of,
he was very important at that time. Go ahead.
Yeah, he was, I got to Florida to Gainesville in '94, and he showed up about that time. And I think he stayed for about a year or so. He stayed at the Rights Union, like you were saying, across from the Center for Wetlands. And he came, and Odum even had him like give lectures in the ecological economics course. And they were talking a lot about the Marx paper, and he's big into Sigmund Freud and the ego. That's probably another paper I think that he cut out in a diagram of that. But the funny story I can remember was all this talk about the word and the basis, the etymology of emergy, and you go back and he'd researched the etymology of energy and work, and you look back far enough, and they both come from the Greek word ergo. And I was like, well, we have a word for the emergy, for the joules, but we don't really have a word for transformity, a name for the unit. So I was like, we should name it after Odum. And he's like, yeah, we'll call it the Odumity.
Odum would never allow things named after him because he said it's really easy to shoot something down when it's named after somebody, and so he refused to go along with calling anything an Odum. So he was very adamant about that.
But well, we should revisit that because you think about all the energy terms, watts and joules, or the whole electrical field, right? Everything's named after some scientist. Anyway, that's great. Good stuff about Dr.
Science Man, there were two halves to Science Man. One was his PhD in quantum mechanics, and the other half was a PhD in political economics. So he actually had dual PhDs. And the political economics part of what he did, if you look at, I collected writings of Science Man for a long time because he would send me these papers he'd written. I've still got them all up there. But this guy Essink was he was a psychology guy. And so I collected these papers and that's a tough tender. Yeah, I might remember his model on tough tender political systems. But anyhow, there's a lot of Science Man thoughts there. And, they're worth consideration, I think, for some other person in the future, not me.
Well, Odum had the political paper where you looked at the two-party system,
right?
And it seemed like that was what maximized power. I don't know if Science Man was part of that paper or what the history of that one is.
It was a tough tender. He called it tough
tender. Yeah.
Right. That's that paper.
He was thinking about the British political system, but anyhow, I've got the papers there. If anybody ever has time and is interested in them, I can pull them out.
But back and forth.
Yeah. And in his later years, all of his stuff was religious, and I could never get enough sense out of him to be able to interpret his models because he wouldn't tell me what he'd written down. He'd send me these models, but you have to know what the symbols are, stand for in order to do much with them. But anyhow, that's another project. But anyway, there's a project out there with just Science Man on it for somebody.
That's good. That's a good. He was prominent there in the 80s and the 90s then. So, all right, Dan, we'll go back to you and your relationship with HT. So he's obviously important in your professional development and your careers, and you also have the benefit of actually being slightly related to him in some way. Is that right?
Before I got done, I became part of the family. That was that should have been a separate decision. But anyhow, HT had a mixed family with Betty's children and then his, and they had to make a life together with what they had been given, so to speak. And so that's a whole nother story there. But I spent 26 years in total with HT. That was a long time, and I spent it with him as a student and also as a family member, I guess, kind of on the periphery. I was an in-law. So I got a pretty good look at him all around. And
what was your relationship? You haven't said that.
What?
What was your relationship? You haven't said that.
I was his what was I?
You married Daddy's daughter.
I married Daddy's daughter, so I was his step-son-in-law.
Yeah.
Step-son-in-law.
stepson-in-law, right? Because he married Betty, and I
Yeah.
married Betty's daughter. And Kathy had her own opinions of HT, which were not too favorable, because she couldn't stand anybody that couldn't let other people be part of the system. HT, he was always the captain of the ship, regardless of what it was. Anyhow, it didn't bother me, but because I learned from him, regardless of what mode he was in. And we went to Brantford with him for years, and HT had his own hut where he went out there and wrote some of his books and papers and things, and talked to
Explain
people.
Brantford. Explain Brantford. What was that?
All right, Brantford was the summer home of Betty Odum, HT's wife's. God, what were they? They were their first cousin, I think, of.
Chase, wasn't it? Wasn't it Chase? Chase
Right,
Cottage?
it was Chase Cottage, but the women, Ellen and Elizabeth, they were Chases. Elizabeth Chase was deputy director of the art museum at Yale, and Elizabeth was a Latin teacher in high school in Ware, Massachusetts, and they owned this place. It was right on the water, not far from, it was at Brantford, Connecticut, so it wasn't far from Yale, but it's right on the water. And they had their own boat, used to tie it up to a big pole sticking out of the water. And during World War II, they would take the boat out and look for Nazi submarines. They got some kind of award from the Coast Guard for doing that. So we would go to this house that, when I first started going there, the rule was that the people that went there did the maintenance on it. So if there's something that needed to be repaired, we'd be out there knocking nails in or putting paint on or something like that. But then, and well, they weren't their aunts, but the women that were their relatives were still alive, and they would come there and use it and doing part of the year. And they invited everybody else to use it. The whole family could use it. So HT and Betty came, and they, took good advantage of it, went sailing, and HT never went sailing, actually, that I remember. Betty went sailing with the rest of us. Yeah, and HT needed his own boat that he could be captain of. This one wasn't going to work. Pete was captain of the boat, and he had a couple of instances where he turned it over. Pete's Kathy's brother. He was, a little bit more adventurous. Anyhow, that was interesting look at the world. You see HT cook. You think HT can cook? Yep, he can cook. You make Brunswick stew and throw everything under the sun in there.
I had never thought that he could cook.
He can cook, believe me or not. He can.
That's a new one.
It's easy.
How was it? How was it?
It wasn't too bad. Just put everything in the kitchen. You can put everything in the kitchen sink in a stew, and it's including the blueberries, the blackberries, everything could go in there. No, that was.
Sounds like a parallel to his thoughts on how you could restore ecosystems by throwing in all the genetic material.
Right, see what survives.
Self-organization of the stew.
He had this student that was part of the NASA program. Remember that guy, Mark? He was supposed to design systems for outer space. I don't remember what his name was now, but he couldn't get around the fact that HT wanted to use self-organization to make the system work. He wanted it all categorized. I don't remember what his name was. I guess I could think of it.
Not Nelson, was it?
No, he looked like a NASA guy. I don't remember him now, though. I don't remember him well enough, but I'm sure his some paper is at UF Library with his name on it. But HT, he did a lot of his important work at Brantford, and he had this little cottage that was just his. He would go in there. It was actually kind of a shed that was on the side of the main house, so he could go out there and close the door, and nobody could get to him. So unless you happen to be brave enough to talk to him, so there I could ask him stuff there. I was always curious about what HT thought about. The higher powers in the world, the idea that there's a God and there's somebody up there that's kind of governing things or something like that. So I was able to ask him about things like that there and get some.
Wait a minute, you can't just drop that and go on. What did he say?
You really know who's running the universe according to HT?
Yeah.
Well, you can guess that it has something to do with the whole system. So what's God? God is a manifestation of, the whole system and the way it operates. And so his work on second law of thermodynamics and all the things that he did are part of and parcel of the process that's needed to keep things running in a orderly fashion. But it needs the maximum power principle too, of course. And you have to use it properly. You can't abuse the maximum power principle, which a lot of people would like to do. Never mind. Yeah, so, he thought that if there was such a thing as God, it has something to do with the system as a whole and the way it operates. And that it was not something, he didn't, expound on that particular idea, but that's what I got from him.
Okay.
Related to the whole operation of the whole system, and that there's any entity, or he didn't actually call it even entity. I don't remember his exact words at this point, but I did get the sense that, his feeling was that God related to the system as a whole and the way it worked. And that was, a key aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Did he ever comment on
it's got your name on it. There's a lot of it in there, Mark. So we're gonna come to you and say, Mark, who's running the system anyway? I'm just kidding.
Did he ever comment on the religions of the world as the like special cases of these principles, or did he go to that kind of level of detail, or you think he kind of ignored a lot of that? The religious.
I mean, you can read his stuff on that. Read the thing about Muslim society set up as a model of a explosive system. One that that there's some in the what's the name of the society? Ergon, not Ergon. The one down in DeLand, Florida.
Oh yeah, there's a paper there on religion.
Yeah. There's some in there. I have to go back and look at it. I didn't look at it.
Was it Zygon? Was it Zygon?
Zygon, that's it. Thank you, Zygon. I mean, somebody could do another paper on that. I mean, they should at this point, especially if it's because the Muslim world has changed so much. He had, fundamental Muslim religion as being one of these chargers for explosive system, which it looks like it's been. But there's
the idea you just mentioned that somebody ought to do a paper about. Do you realize that this is 2024 and HT would be 100 years old this September 1st?
Well,
and I've suggested that maybe we need to do something official or something to mark the time. And Diageo, our friend in Brazil, has suggested that maybe there should be a special issue of a journal somewhere, and that we all contribute papers to. So
yeah, sure. That's interesting. You've been talking to him. I don't know. He's president of the Emergy Society, but I don't know what he has on his mind. I guess I need to write him and find out.
Yeah.
He's Brazil. They kind of cut us off because he wasn't able to get visa to come here at one point. I think that was the last Emergy Society meeting. But anyway, let's go back to your 100-year anniversary of HT's birth. So you really want to do something on that?
Yeah, I think that it's important. I mean, certainly we'll do something at the Emergy conference, but maybe before then we need to think about something. So Diageo said that he was going to check with the Journal of Cleaner Production, but we might look at something else besides that journal for a good paper on astrology, a good paper on religion. It'd be fun,
20 years, yeah. I mean, he's been gone for 22 years, right? So there's lots happened.
What in the world has happened during that time? That's true.
It's pretty crazy.
I think what's interesting to me is you go back, you can trace the elements of things that are happening today to back with things that he was thinking about and mentioning, in environment, power, and society and general systems, and you see elements of those, right? So it's fun to like trace that heritage and
Yeah.
Also, it's interesting to see where he got it from as well. You know, who was influencing him, the whole lineage of these ideas, and then some projection of what's going to happen in the future. It would be fun if we do little mini models of some of these things.
Uh, you,
So,
you
Dan,
David.
yeah,
What's
you
that,
wound
Dan?
up in New Zealand with HT when he went to New Zealand on sabbatical. And I think, didn't you study the Spartina marshes down there?
Yeah, I waited my turn in line with HT. You had to wait your turn to get what, and my turn was a chance to go to New Zealand with him. And so that was George Knox. You may remember George Knox, the
Yeah.
New Zealand Antarctic scientist and ecologist. It was an admirable person in himself. And we went to visit him, and we stayed at can't remember the guy's name. It was institute at University of Canterbury, which subsequently was destroyed by the earthquake there. When I went back a couple of years ago when Christina was there, the University of Canterbury was completely different. But anyhow, but George Knox's marine station on Kaikoura Bay was still there and it's still being protected. But anyway, that was a different location, of course, wasn't subject to earthquake. Well, it was hit by the earthquake actually, but it survived it. But we went there and we did marshes. That was George Knox's thing. And we worked out of Auckland a while. He went up there and then Canterbury. And we looked at the invading Spartina in Marlborough Sounds, which was the northern part of the South Island. And we saw, what it did. And then when I went back again, I took pictures. It's completely you wonder who's taking over the world anyway. At that point, there was this little estuarine area that was a mooring place for yachts, and it had been completely layered in with sediment from a dredging project they had. They dredged and all the sediment went straight into this bay and filled it up. So when I got there, so one question, well, what was going to happen? Well, it was going to stay, filled up unless they dredged it out because it had all come from this dredging project. Well, most of it had anyway. But when I got back, the whole area was changed. The area that used to be a small marina was a giant marina with all these boats in it. The whole area had built up, so it was completely developed in a zone. And you could barely tell what was there before. So you wonder who the aggressor was. The question was, what's going to happen when this bay fills up with sediments? Well, what's going to happen is human beings are going to take over the whole area, turn it into a giant vacation plot, build this tremendous marina, and you're going to go from there. You're not going to have anything left that's recognizable from the earlier time, except there was a green mussel fishery that they continued to prosecute, but take out. But yeah, no, we did that study, and we went around to a whole bunch of other places in New Zealand too with him, which was very interesting. He would stop at every because there's so many different ecosystems there. They're all different forests, and they're all ones that he admired because they kind of taken over the world, right? The southern version of forest systems. They're beaches or something. I think it's their beech trees. But anyhow, and we would go to places. We went to this one place where they mined for gold. So they had Kathy and me. Kathy came on that trip as my assistant. She's HT's stepdaughter, I guess, who's my wife, Betty's daughter. So we went to this Westland place where they have the glaciers, and also they have all these areas where they're mining for gold because it's washed out and deposited there. So here goes HT across this area that's full of where they close to where they mine for gold, but it has these big ravines in it. So the ravines are like 2 or 3 feet across, and they go down like 8 or 9 feet. So HT's bounding across this area. I think we were looking for a place to mine for our own gold, right? With their pans and everything. So, and here's HT, here's Betty, and Kathy and I coming on. I was behind Betty, and all of a sudden we're going across this area, and boom, Betty disappears. what happened to Betty? She went down one of these ravines. I look, she's down 10 feet at the bottom of this ravine, looking for her glasses in the sediment. So we had to go down and fish Betty out of this ravine.
Wow.
And and then we went ahead. We did go to a place where you could go by. Of course, I think we did get something out of it, but not a whole lot. Anyhow, HT was looking for one of those fortunes. But and we went there. We went to the rainforest, which was there too. The Kakura, wasn't Kakura. What was the name of the? There's a big tree that grows there. I can't remember the name of it.
Eucalyptus?
No, it's not imported. It's like a native species that is. We went there, and then Kathy and I got a train ticket and traveled around the islands once Betty and HT left. So we stayed there 2 or 3 more months. But we saw a lot when HT was there. Anyhow, that's my story. I guess I can't. HT and Betty and George Knox and his wife loved to play cards. They would play cards all the time. They always had a deck of cards with them. Didn't make any difference where they went to eat. They were going to set up a card game, so waiting didn't make any difference as long as they had their cards. So
I remember that. Betty always carried a deck of cards, and airplane or train or wherever, then they would start playing.
What was their game? What the game they like to play? The card game.
That's a good question. I didn't play with them. It was the
Oh, you didn't play?
I used to play bridge with them, and Betty would play. She loved to play Scrabble, not Scrabble, but what's the Boggle or whatever the game is with letters. She loved to get. She just loved to get HT playing that game because she would beat him a good percentage of the time. She enjoyed beating him. So, and HT hated to lose. He lost. He wanted to play another game, right?
I remember him telling me that when he was a child, they couldn't play cards because they thought it was a sin from to be playing cards.
Who thought that? HT's mom?
I guess his mom, yeah, wouldn't let them play cards.
That's interesting.
So he must have really felt like he was rebelling, I guess, once he got to play cards.
I came from a tradition in Virginia where card playing was forbidden too. They were Southern Baptists. My grandmother didn't. She didn't allow us to play cards, but she would let us play rook. Ever heard of rook?
Yeah.
It's a game. It's like playing cards, but it's not actually playing cards, right? I guess maybe because you can't bet on it, but I bet you could bet on rook too.
Sure.
Yeah. I didn't realize that about HT's mother.
So, being a member of the family, do you remark about the TV room in HT and Betty's house and how she decided to make it possible to live with HT?
No, I don't know that story. You tell us.
Okay. Well, they had 2 TVs sitting side by side. And HT had the control for one, and she had the control for the other one.
I remember that.
And she couldn't stand the fact that because he couldn't watch one thing, he was always moving around.
Yeah.
She wanted to watch a program, and she wanted to watch what she wanted to watch. So her idea of a happy marriage was 2 televisions with 2 remote controls.
Well, I think it probably worked for him. I mean, I know, when I stayed in the house there with him, you'd go in and you'd see HT would stay up all night watching TV and working on stuff. He never stopped working on somebody's dissertation or somebody's paper or something. He was always trying to do his own stuff, but he also worked on everybody else's stuff too. And you see this list of programs. He loved these old Westerns. I remember that. Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't even think. I never watched them, but well, I did watch them, I guess some, but not really. But he would watch all these, old 30s TV shows when he was doing his work.
Yeah, he'd sit there with the stuff in his lap.
Yeah, exactly.
And work and watch all night long.
I know.
Betty said he hardly ever slept in the bed.
That's why he got so much done, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't good for his health, though.
Mm.
It's another question there.
Yeah.
Thinking about family, you might have some insight on this, like if he ever talked much about his dad, but then also his relationship with Hutchinson. I don't know if he ever talked to you much about that. There's a gentleman here in my department who's an adjunct from the geologics USGS, who's doing kind of a biography of Hutchinson or interested in him. So, we're looking for those linkages.
I met Hutchinson when he was, HT would come up to Brantford every year, and that's not that far from Yale. So, we would go over to the museum there because they had a lot of good dinosaur fossils and things. So one time HT said, "Come on, we're going to go over. You're going to meet G. Evelyn Hutchinson." He didn't call him that, Hutchinson, or whatever he called him. I don't remember what he called him. So anyway, we went over there. I met him a couple of times, and he had a younger wife who was black, and they would go up to the library and work. And so he would come up, and HT wanted him to hear about my dissertation or something I was doing. I don't remember. You always knew how to embarrass you, But anyway, I was there telling, I have to remember the punchline now. I was there telling Hutchinson about my dissertation. And he, of course, cut through. He was like HT. He could cut through all the bullshit and get right down to the essence of things. Hutchinson was the same way. He didn't want to hear. He didn't want to hear the fluff around it. He wanted to know what you were doing and why. So he cut right to the chase of the dissertation, and which was on the filter properties of ecosystems. And he asked about that. I don't remember the exact words anymore, but I remember I was impressed with his perspicacity, his ability to cut through things and understand what was going on. And he was not a young man at that point. Hutchinson wasn't. He was
actually pretty old.
Yeah, he was. I don't know whether he was in his 80s or not, but he wasn't a young man. But I was impressed with him.
So HT did keep up with it, kept in contact with him, because it was a mystery whether he even kept in contact with him. It sounds like he made some informal visits with him at least.
He was able to call up and go over and see him if he wanted to.
Yeah, but they never collaborated, obviously, on anything after.
No, Hutchinson, he had his own set of ideas, didn't he?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much you probably know better, David, the relationship between HT and Hutchinson. I'm not sure.
I don't really know much.
No.
But anyway, it's a good project for your friend to try to.
Yeah. Well, there's just somebody just published a biography on Hutchinson that maybe is a few years old, but there's a little bit. There's probably a few pages on Odum in it, but not a lot.
That might be worth looking at.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, Pat's working on something, and
yeah, Pat's cooking up something good. He's diving into the correspondence between the brothers, and maybe some of the other family members. I haven't talked to him lately about it, but
between HT and Eugene, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Supposedly they had this. They were writing letters back and forth from when Eugene was even in, I guess, left for college, and then throughout their career, and then it switches to email eventually. So there's a whole record, and a lot of that stuff's in the Florida archives, and I guess at the Georgia archives as well. So Pat's been visiting both places and working with Mary as well, Mary Odum, because she actually has the copyright on all that stuff. So
she has the copyright on HT's letters?
That's what Pat said.
Huh, that's interesting.
So copyright lasts a long time. It's like 70 years past your death. They're still copyrighted.
I don't know. What about HT's written books? She has copyright on those too, I guess. Huh?
I don't know how that gets. I guess so. I guess she didn't inherit everything, right? It's got to pass on to somebody.
There's a lot of territory in HT's work that everybody uses. So it's all copyrighted. We'll be in big trouble.
I just can cite it. Yeah.
Mark has to worry about this with this book. I guess. I don't know. Maybe not.
We're getting outside of the realm of my expertise, but but Pat's very excited. So he's working full force on this book, based on the letters and the correspondence.
Somebody did write a dissertation on Odum's father. That's out there somewhere. Harold Washington. I don't know. Anyhow.
So what was so you were at EPA for a long time. So, you and I started to get to interact, I guess, in the early 2000s a little bit about, you held some meetings, and it seemed like you were getting continue to get the EPA groups interested in Emergy and systems ecology, and
They
that
weren't.
that was a tough road to hoe, I would guess.
Well, there's a lot of pushback in the government against any kind of systems thinking, and especially if it had to do with HT. There was a guy, what was the crazy guy, Robinson? Remember him? What happened to him?
Tom Robinson.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time stirring the pot in the wrong direction. But anyhow,
Tom Robertson, yeah.
yeah, I
I
mean,
asked HT about him one time. Tom Robertson was at the University of Florida and thought a lot of HT, and organized several different conferences and whatnot to try and showcase Odum and his systems. And then Tom moved up to Washington, D.C., and he started, like you said, stirring the pot. But unfortunately, he had nothing to back it up. He had no knowledge of what was going on, except a lot of words. And he got a lot of people turned off. But I remember one time when I was up there, and he was taking me around to all these different places, EPA and this department and that department. And he would walk into an office, and if nobody was there, he'd pick up the phone and start calling, because he could call anybody anywhere in the country on the Fed dollar, on the Fed dime.
yeah.
And he got us into a lot of trouble. And like you said, it maybe stirred the pot in the wrong direction. But I asked HT about him one time. I said, why do you put up with, people like that and give them space in your life and in your career? And he said, maybe it's because as an ugly duckling as a kid and being mistreated so much by your peers and so forth, you have a special place that you put those kind of people to give them the opportunity to, to be okay and to be accepted. And it really blew me away.
That's a really good story, Mark. I've not heard that one before. And
I said, yeah.
well,
that explains a lot.
this paper here, my colleagues and I published when I was at the EPA. It's about the recession of 2008 and what caused it and what the energy basis for it was. And, it brings in the whole thing. This was, Hal Walker publicized this around the world, sent it around to all kinds of people. So we had everybody from Moscow to Washington to Yale. Everybody was reading this paper. And the EPA got a hold of it. They looked at it and they held it up. So this is exactly what we don't want the EPA to be dealing with. Even though, we're responsible for the environment and the shape that it's in, you're not allowed to look at the context of why things are as they are. And, if you use Emergy, that's even worse. But so that kind of resistance, I got that the whole time I was there from people in Washington. Somebody, that's why I think Pat is right when that paper he did. When he comes back, I'm going to look at that again. But it's about Taylor, the one that wrote about how there's an ingrained bias among people that have to evaluate things politically against thinking systematically about problems, especially using Emergy. So if something needs to be done in Washington, I think that's it. Need to take some heavy duty intellectual explosives down there and set them off. I'm sorry. We'll see. I still have to look at Pat's paper again, but it was a good paper. It was about this guy, Taylor. Taylor used to come to Brampton and talk to Odum. He was a political science guy, and he wrote this paper that claimed that people were biased against systems thinking and against what we do.
Well, that explains why it took 9 years to get the Emergy database released with EPA. I guess you
Sissy sent the address out to me. I'm going to put it in this one I'm doing.
Yeah, finally, 9 years it took. We finished that study in 2015. And EPA has said, okay, you can now put it out there for the world in 2024.
Well, it's still a good study. And there's a lot of.
Oh yeah, but it really hurt Emergy. It hurt Emergy for not having that data out there for so many years.
Well, I think it needed review.
Well, yeah, It got review, but then there was.
And that was another couple of years after the review was over, you're right. But still, anyhow, it's out there now, which is good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what
Well,
else? So we I don't know if we're getting close to the end, but we touched on this earlier, but those ideas of like what question would you want to ask HT if he were alive today? And I'm sure you got a lot. I don't know if you can identify one or
I mean, I never found HT to have a closed mind on anything. I mean, he would consider it, even if you gave him a, version of something that didn't fit exactly what he wanted, he would still consider it critically. So, in that sense, there's so much inside. I sat down and looked at a copy of Scientific American before I sat down here. It was on the Pyrocene, the age of fire. These big guys, people they're always looking for something new to focus on. They'll get people interested in. And it's not the Anthropocene anymore. Now it's the Pyrocene. So, and maybe that's a valid thing because you look half the western part of the United States is on fire every spring or every summer. So people are always going to come up with new ideas and things to think about. But I think the important thing is you mentioned here earlier is that are we using the best thinking that we have in terms of systems and the way they work to understand these new ideas? Have we applied what we know about or think we know about the way the world works and helping people better understand the problems that we're faced with? So, I mean, I think if we were to maintain the, freedom of thought or the, to look at things, each problem as it comes up clearly with an open mind, we may find that we get closer to the actual truth of things by looking at them through a mind that looks at systems thinking, but also thinks about how it can be applied in a way that's useful, whatever that way is. I think I made a mistake in the past by trying to be too, basically anytime you're using systems thinking and the transformations of energy as a basis for your understanding, the positive result is going to come from that, regardless of what problem you're faced with. And even what way you choose to do the analysis, because one thing that I think we've learned, at least I've learned from, thinking about the way that we evaluate systems is that everything is based in terms of an Emergy accounting on the rules that you choose to do the accounting by. So that not the rules aren't all the same that people are using. Some people are using a different set of rules. And that's not necessarily bad or wrong. The important thing is that you realize what rules you're using and that those rules are then formulated in a way that gives us results that best correspond with what we understand about a system, way the system is operating. Are we actually categorizing it, evaluating it in a way that's most accurate in terms of predicting what we will see when we look at how the system operates under those influences? In other words, we expect the system to operate in a way that is consistent with what we predict from the laws of thermodynamics and from the aspects of energy accounting that we know and apply. So, and you get different things about a way about looking at it different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just we need to keep track of what we're doing while we're doing it, and then how does the outcome line up with or correspond to what we predict will happen from our evaluation methods. That's an important aspect of the accounting problem that I'm not sure that we've captured to the extent that we could possibly capture it. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it comes down to that boundary conditions. What do you assume inside the system and outside the system, and what you're just interested in seeing what crosses the boundary, right?
Yeah, it's always the boundary condition, isn't it? But right. But the question really is, with regard to boundaries, is have you set the boundary at the point where you need to set it in order to be able to predict the behavior that you're interested in? So the boundary that's a flexible choice, but test of that is how well the evaluation system predicts the property that you're trying to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Question is always how well. That's the question.
That's always the
How do you
question.
measure how
I think
well?
that's one of that will be,
I've a preconceived notion of how it should be. Therefore, if it matches that, it's right.
But that's a good point, Mark. But we don't want to have that preconceived notion. We want to be open to it.
But
Can you be? All right. I mean, well, I'll have to think about that one for a while.
well, I think that's something Emergy could, from a practice of science, the more validation of our predictions would be of huge benefit. I think we're still,
Exactly.
a lot of people just take the theory and assume that these principles are true, and therefore if you use them, they're going to predict, but there's no double checking on whether or not what you predicted is what's happening in the real world sometimes.
Yeah, that's the essence of validation there, David.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think Odum, he didn't spend a lot of time on validation, right?
Very little. Very little. There are a few glimpses out there, but not many.
He liked to get the ideas out there.
Yeah. Well, of course he was the one to get him out there because he was sure he was right.
Captain of the ship.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, I think it's our job to be the validators, right? I mean, we're the people that can take his ideas and really understand them and try to test them out. So
they should be tested. They should be validated. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So,
for sure.
That's great. Well, I knew this would be a gem of an interview. We probably could go on for another hour and a half talking about all kinds of topics. So maybe we'll schedule a part 2
you
down
guys
the road.
contributed quite a bit to this as well, so I appreciate the new things I learned in doing it.
Yeah, I talked to I saw Pat. He's loving them. He saw Charlie Hall's and maybe John Day's and a few of the early ones, and he's looking really forward
that would be
hearing
interesting
everybody's.
to see Charlie Hall, and I knew
Yeah.
him pretty well. It'd be interesting to see what he had to say.
Yeah, he's got some of the earliest stories, from the 60s. Him and I mean, it's just my name. The guy from Puerto Rico, Lugo, Ariel Lugo. Yeah, Lugo. Yeah. So he had some great ones too.
I was looking at Charlie Hall's stuff yesterday. I didn't actually use his book, but he's got this book here. Doesn't spend much time on HT's work, but it's interesting. But at the end, he kind of thinks twice about it and puts it in at the end, but it's not fun.
I think the thing I took away from that interview with Charlie, and this is probably still being recorded, but I guess I'd always thought that Charlie was a modeler and very quantitative, just because of the ecological economics and the energy analysis that he was so into. But I realized he said he's a fishery guy. He really likes to fish. And he can appreciate the system, but I don't think he doesn't dive deep into the math, which I think you have to have a certain level of math appreciation to really understand Emergy, because it's obviously related to the system dynamics,
Charlie has such a forceful personality. He kind of, comes out strong wherever he is. He used to come to the Emergy Society meetings. I guess we're not big enough for him anymore, but anyhow.
Yeah, he's way out in Montana, I think now. So
yeah, not traveling much anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
this is great, Dan. It's good to see you. Really
Thank
appreciate you doing this.
This was really good. You never answered the question. If you had the opportunity, what would you ask HT?
If I had the opportunity, what would I ask him?
Yeah.
Well, I guess my main question would be is, could he answer it if I asked him that?
Okay.
One thing that's of interest, I'll get off on another subject now. One thing of interest to me is religions in the world and the way they manage to get at each other's throats pretty easily, and the way they manage to prevent people from fulfilling their destinies as human beings by a set of rules that don't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So I would see if you had any thoughts on that. So you think about what's happening in Afghanistan, for example, and that separation of women from society, basically, as being something other than. Same, one of the things I did for the Emergy that I wasn't able to contribute much in the EPA because the interest wasn't there to do it, although I certainly raised the flag enough times. But by going to China, by starting that interaction before other people had started it, and other people took it up and did a better job than I could ever do. But I started doing that in 2004. And by then, once I left the EPA, the last thing it was again to interact with these Iranian students. And I took that afterwards and spent about, I don't know, I have to count the years, 6 or 8 years, just spreading the use of energy systems theory, evaluating agricultural systems in Iran. And the person I had helping me there was a guy from, he studied in Denmark, but he's from Iran, and he's done very good, raised the flag and, gotten people there, at least so they don't turn off immediately from it. There's some interest in it, especially with all the problems they have with their agricultural systems. So the publications coming out of Iran, I've had something with starting those, and I did my part in China, as Mark has, I might add, and other people that have gone there and spent a lot of time with the Chinese, for better or worse. But anyhow, I think those were both important, outreach that we've done that HT would be proud of, hopefully. And then who's holding the line in academia. The only person I can think of now that I know is, presenting and studying Emergy in the academic world here.
Trying to get back to it a little more strongly. We've been off of it for a few years, but yeah, it's never left.
I know, but
sure.
Your knowledge is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be, then you're always going to be thinking on the front of things. You're good at that. So keep it up.
Yeah. Well, we have to get together.
Yeah.
It'd be fun. Just to.
I'm up that way this summer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We travel up the East Coast, starting in late June, and don't return to Florida until the heat's gone. And
you got the system turned around right now, Mark.
Are you going up to like Pennsylvania and Richmond?
Yeah, I'll go to Richmond first, and then from Richmond I fly to China for 2 weeks, and then I'm back in Pennsylvania, and and then in that area. So I'll send you my itinerary, or rough itinerary, and if you can get it together, I'll try to attend.
Yeah, if you're in, because you might be in Allentown area. I think that's where Carol's family, right? That's only like a 3-hour drive down here.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, it's not far at all.
That'd be good. That's funny. I'm going to be driving south in mid-June, so we might be crossing, headed to Florida eventually.
Your daughter works at the Virginia Museum, right? Virginia Art. So you're going to go, when are you going to go there?
Let me go ahead and just stop the recording here, and then we can talk some more.
Oh yeah.
That's okay. Don't record it. That's all right.